we're back. This is TF. We're going to be doing this series on the Series 5, Series 5 Basic, Series 6, and J2L versions of the CCM marker. They're around. There are only 25 of the Series 5 Basics made. There have been a boatload of the Series 6s made, quite a few less of the J2Ls, but basically they all break down the same, basically, with very few differences. Absolutely look up the manuals that I've written on this, and I'll put the link down right now, and check that out. In this video, we're just going to be taking apart the grip frame. And you see I've got an extra grip frame here, an 86 degree versus a 45, to show you some of the differences that you might see in grip frames over the years. So if you see a difference in something in your grip frame, even if you're using a J2, L or a T2 or a Series 6.5, refer to this video. It's got the differences in the grip frames in there. The first thing though, when working on any marker, is make sure your air source is clean. Make sure you've cycled it a couple of times so any residual air is out, and take the barrel off, making sure that your breech is clean. There's no paint balls in there that you can hurt yourself with. All right. So once you've got that off, the first thing we're going to do is take off the grip frame. Now what I do is to take off the ASA for a full breakdown. Normally, I gotta tell you, I leave it on, I'll take it apart, I'll wipe it down, I'll put it back together. But again, for this video, we're gonna do a full breakdown. Take that off. I'll unscrew the reg just to get it out of my way, okay? And then flip this over. CCM markers all use, or when they come, from the factory, they're gonna use a rail here with two screws that widen out, that stretch this portion here and grab onto this rail. So what you need to do is loosen these two screws up. 1/8 inch Allen key, just a simple turn, and you're set. You just want to loosen that up enough to take that off. Now, let me set this aside, and I will go into the ASA itself. This is now a two-part ASA. What you might find when you take yours apart is this goes all the way down to a pin, and there's an O-ring on there. What's important here is not to worry about whether it comes apart in one piece or two pieces, however that comes apart, just that to check that O-ring and keep it lubed at all times, okay? Keep it well greased. I use Hater sauce marmalade, okay? And I put it on there, keeps it lubed, everything's good to go. If it's a two-piece, the brass piece drops in the bottom there, O-ring first, and this screw goes in the bottom. There's not much to know about this. It really doesn't get much easier. Just that's how it comes apart. Okay? Now, what we're going to take apart next here is the grip frame, and what we need to do is loosen up the screws that hold the grip frame on. Now, these screws are recessed. Notice that you don't see the screw heads. On every marker bar the Series 5 Basic, these screw heads were recessed. Don't stick them through the outside. There's a keyhole in there that lets these sit recessed and allows the marker to be to sit, and it looks a lot more clean. At this point, you're going to want to take this auto trigger arm off. And again, just like the T2 Series 6.5, you just loosen this enough in order to cant this marker enough, push in the rail, and slide that auto trigger arm off of there. That's the easiest way I do it, and that's how it works. Now, when you're sliding this off, it won't come off unless you pull the trigger. It'll be a big pain in the butt without the trigger pulled. The sear, if you can see that, the sear is grabbing. Pull the sear down, and the grip frame comes off. Okay? I'll set the body aside. Here is your grip frame. Now I want to show you some differences, what you might be seeing that's different. Okay? You also might have, and I'll just keep this one in my hands, a hole over here that has a ball bearing and a spring. When you are taking this off the marker, and you don't know what you have, if you bought it just recently, it probably has a pin, but you might have bought a used one, or you might just know what you have. Take it apart carefully and keep it upright. If it's got a ball and a spring, carefully dump those out in your hands and set those aside. Okay? That will then have this corresponding auto trigger to hold that ball bearing in there, and that was keeping everything aligned. Then Chipley went to a pin system. That can be best shown in this one. The pin now is on this side, okay? And what that did is this pin retained the cam and arm and held it in. Now it won't fall out at all unless you take the pin out. Of course, the wrong pin fell out first. That's the trigger pin, which I want to take out later. Okay, but I'll take it out for right now. There we go. Now, what just happened was this pin just came out of this rear hole. But look at how little these pins are, dudes. So make sure you're not losing them, okay? Clear background. I mentioned in the T2 video, maybe you can get a magnetic tray to hold these in. But at this point, the trigger, the AT cam and pin, which goes right there when it's put back together, has come out. No reason to take this apart unless you've got a serious mess. But frankly, I've never taken one of these apart unless I was switching something out. Okay, something had worn or something like that. So that comes out and all gets set aside. And again, make sure you're keeping track of these little bitty pins. It's a great addition, but those pins can be a bear if you lose them. Okay, so take off the grip panels. Grip panels can come in many instantiations depending on the year of the CCM. This is a Chipley wraparound grip. You also might have flat panel Delrin grips that I show in the T2 video. Whatever's comfortable for you. I don't care what you run, you know. I run typically wraparound grips. Most of mine have die sticky 3s. No, die sticky 2s. Actually, die sticky 1s is what I've been running because they're all black. You know, all my guns are black, so it's all good. So I take that off, those 4 screws get set aside, and that was a 3/32 Allen key that took that off. Slide that off, set it aside. Now, at this point, what you might have, especially on the 86-degree frame, is this pin is not just able to be punched out. It might have a screw at this point. Here's why. When the grip frames are on, notice it holds that pin in, and there's no reason to have a redundant retention system, okay? The early Series 5s had another screw there that was holding that in. No need for it once the grip panels are on, and all grip panels reach the right length. The 86-degree frame, because it runs a CZ type grip, needs to have this screw. All you need to do then is to take this screw out with a 5/64 and then push the pin out with something thin, a 050 Allen key or a pick. Push that pin out and it comes right out. In this case, and in most cases for 45s and modern, you just push that pin out this other side and it falls out. Okay? That pin is much bigger, as you can see in the video. I hope you can. Yep, you can. That pin is much bigger than the other, so you shouldn't get those confused. At that point, the sear just comes straight out and the sear spring comes straight out. Okay? Now, I've said this in other videos, but I'll say it again. I always keep my sear highly polished. Okay? You can see how shiny that is. I keep that highly polished. I clean it up to 200 grit and then I buff it on a buffing wheel with Jeweler's Rouge. Now, because this tiny pin has already come out, if it hasn't, take it out at this point. All you've got left is the pin that holds the trigger in, the pivot pin. That just pushes out the other side. And it's kind of cool looking. It's got this little piece, and that's where the pin goes that holds the trigger pin in. Boop, right there, just like that. So that's what that is. And at that point, you have this dropping out. The trigger has this little ball bearing. It's actually not a ball bearing. It's almost like a little bead. They used to run ball bearings, and you might have a ball bearing. If you do, consider yourself lucky because I think that's a better trigger. Not that I can really tell in application, but I just like the idea that it's a sealed ball bearing. Anyway, check the sides of your trigger to make sure there's no scratches, marks. If there is, 2000 grit sandpaper with a little bit of water on it, sand that down, make it as smooth as possible, and put it back together. Okay? Also, you can take off the rail, which takes a 5/32, but again, you'd have to take some serious hits and make a big mess of your gun before you need to take that off, okay? I'll take it off just because I'm doing a full breakdown, but you quite often do not need to do that, okay? Now, at this point, you've got an empty frame, completely empty. And you can even see, I haven't used this marker. This is coming off my shelf after lubrication, so it's fine. But what you want to do at this point is make sure every crevice, every little possible spot where it could be dirty is clean. The first thing that has to go in is the trigger. It just has to. If you put the sear in first, you can't get the trigger in, okay? This is the pin that holds the trigger in. It's got that little grabby-do on the end of there. That's a technical term. Don't use that unless you're completely qualified like I am. It goes in, and then the littlest pin is what retains that in that spot, okay? And what you can find is that has to be finessed a little. If you over insert it, it just fights you in. But this one went in just fine, and you can see that the trigger is moving freely at this point, okay? So, next is the spring. It seats in a little recess there. All the grip frames have them. I hold onto that spring, put in the sear, and this is where you're going to want more than two hands, but you don't have them, to line up the hole to put this pin back in. Okay? Hey, I got it right the first time, and that's actually kind of lucky. I usually have to fight it a little bit. That goes back in there, and you're good to go. Next thing that goes back on is your auto trigger. This pin drops in. Remember, it's the longer pin. It drops in the back hole there, not the front one. That's the trigger. Won't even go in that far. That drops in, and now that should float freely. Your trigger should also be snappy at this point. If it is not this snappy, take it back apart, clean it, find out what is causing that, grit and grime, whatever it is that's causing that, and fix it. Then we're going to put back on the grip panels, okay? These 4 screws can fight you a little bit, and you're going to want to make sure that you're aligning these properly. What I usually do is I give them just about finger tight with a little bit of slop, because wraparound grips, particularly die stickies, want to not be long enough. You got to stretch them and fight them and finesse them and stuff like that. So without look at there. Without tightening that down completely, I would have lost that pin if I was out at the field. Without tightening that down completely allows you a little bit of play in getting these tightened down. Why am I so anal about that? What you don't want to do is to over tighten or fight stainless steel screws into an aluminum frame. If you strip that out, you know, the stainless steel screws are far cheaper to replace than an aluminum frame is, or getting it helicoiled, which CCM can do, but it's just a pain and it costs money. You don't want to do that, so I just make sure that it gets tightened down, finger tight. Don't over tighten these. Sometimes you can even push them right through the wraparounds. Finger tight, they're not going to go anywhere. They're held in by rubber. The rubber of the grip frame. Let's put the auto trigger cam back in. Again, simple thing, but I should have kept that vertical. There, it's back in. That's reassembled now. All I need to do is put back on the rail and the ASA. So I'll hold that pin in if I'm going to flip it upside down. Now, again, you've got 5 holes here to choose from, and that allows you to move this ASA rail, you know, forward to its most forward point, which almost makes it a little drop forward, or to its most rearward point by flipping it around and turning it around. It makes it a little bit of a drop back. Okay, I use a drop back, and I use it in this hole configuration right here. The CCM supplied bolts are 5/32. Of course, that's what we need to use. I think this is a no, this is a 5/32. Tighten that down quickly. Tighten this down quickly. I'm holding that trigger pin in because it's wanting to fall out. Maybe just even put that in at the end so you don't have to fight the darn thing. Give it a tighten that down, make sure it's good to go. Okay? Then we simply slide on the ASA on that rail, turn it over, and tighten down in the position we want it. All up to you. I put it right about here. Actually, right about there. Tighten this down to spread out that rail and grab a hold of the ASA. It's held tight. Everything's been lubricated in here. I might drop one drop of Tri-Flow on the contact point from the sear to the trigger, but beyond that I wouldn't lubricate it at all. You see how snappy and good it is by itself. So as long as it's clean, it should be good to go. That's it for the frame on pretty much every Series 5, Series 5 Basic, Series 6 J2L marker out there, with slight differences. Just look for your differences, read the manual, and you'll be able to see the differences and how you take them apart. Next, we'll move on to the bottom tube and taking the pump handle off. All right, see you then.